Whenever we talk about Russia, we focus on Vladimir Putin, but if you look into the shadows behind the Kremlin, you find a different story. It is the story of a small group of men who bought a superpower for pennies on the dollar. They are called the Oligarchs. The word comes from ancient Greece, meaning rule by the few. Aristotle described it as a corrupted form of aristocracy, but in modern Russia, it refers to the men who seized the nation's wealth after the Soviet collapse. They aren't just rich, they were the architects of modern Russia. They made the presidents, they owned the media, and they controlled the banks. In the West, we see them as villains sanctioned by the US government. But to understand why Russia is at war today, you have to understand the deal these men made with the devil. Today, we are going deep into the full history of the oligarchs, from the chaotic Wild East of the 90s to the falling from windows epidemic of 2022. This is how the masters of Russia became its prisoners. To understand where these billionaires came from, we have to go back to 1985. The Soviet Union was stagnant. A relatively young leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, took power with two radical ideas: perestroika, reform, and glasnost, openness. The economy was failing, technology was lagging behind the West, and corruption was everywhere. Gorbachev tried to introduce elements of a market economy. In 1987 and 1988, new laws allowed private enterprises and cooperatives for the first time. This was the moment the future oligarchs were waiting for. They weren't garage inventors like Steve Jobs. They were opportunists with connections. Take Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He started a business importing computers using funds from the Komsomol, Communist Youth League. Or Boris Berezovsky, a mathematician who used government research funds to import Mercedes-Benz cars. While the state crumbled, they used its resources to build their first fortunes. By 1990, the writing was on the wall. McDonald's opened its first store in Moscow. The site of the Golden Arches in the heart of the Communist Empire was a symbol. Ideologically, the Soviet Union had already lost. By 1991, the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. In August of that year, Communist Party hardliners, desperate to stop the reforms and save the old regime, launched a military coup. But the coup was a disaster. It failed in just 3 days. In the political chaos that followed, Boris Yeltsin emerged as the hero who successfully blocked the coup. He seized power, and with the old guard defeated, the dissolution of the Soviet Union became official. The red flag came down, and the Russian Federation was born. But the new Russia was born into an economic crisis. Yeltsin chose shock therapy to fix the broken system. His deputy prime minister, Yegor Gaidar, predicted that lifting price controls would cause prices to rise maybe 3 or 5 times. He was dead wrong. In just 10 months, inflation hit 3,000%. Prices rose 30 times over. The Russian middle class was wiped out. Life savings turned into toilet paper. In this desperation, the government launched privatization. The goal was to sell off state industries quickly to ensure communism never returned. The architect of this plan, Anatoly Chubais, issued a voucher worth 10,000 rubles to every single Russian citizen. Let's pause here, because this is the key to the entire heist. The government told people these vouchers were like stock certificates. Theoretically, you could use them to buy shares in national giants like Gazprom, making everyone a partial owner of the country. But there was a fatal flaw. The Russian people, having lived under a planned economy their entire lives, had no idea what a stock was. They didn't care about future value. They were starving now due to the economic collapse. Imagine if you were hungry and someone gave you a piece of paper that might be worth something in 10 years. You would trade it for a sandwich. That is exactly what happened. The future oligarchs knew the game. They stood on street corners with bags of cash, buying these vouchers from desperate grandmothers for the price of a bottle of vodka or a bag of flour. They collected millions of these tickets. Using these truckloads of vouchers, they attended government auctions and bought up 15,000 state-owned enterprises for pennies. The people's privatization became the oligarchs' coronation. But the real heist was yet to come. By 1995, the Russian government was broke. Tax collection was non-existent, and President Yeltsin's approval rating had crashed to single digits. The Communist Party was favored to win the 1996 election. If the Communists won, the oligarchs would lose everything. So, led by Vladimir Putin, 7 bankers made a proposal called loans for shares. The deal was simple. We lend the government money to pay pensions and keep the lights on. You give us shares of state oil and metal giants as collateral. It was a rigged game. Everyone knew the government would default on the loans. When it did, the oligarchs kept the collateral. They acquired companies like Yukos Oil and Norilsk Nickel for a fraction of their real value. This group, known as the Semi-Bankiershchina, the 7 bankers, included names like Boris Berezovsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Vladimir Gusinsky, and Vladimir Putin. They now controlled 50 to 70% of the Russian economy. To protect their theft, they had to ensure Yeltsin won. They turned the 1996 election into a massive theater production. They owned the TV stations, so they flooded the airwaves with pro-Yeltsin propaganda and fear-mongering about the communists. It worked. Yeltsin won, but he was now a puppet. The oligarchs effectively appointed government ministers and dictated policy. They were the true rulers of Russia. The oligarchs' party couldn't last forever. In 1998, Russia defaulted on its debt. When Prime Minister Sergei Kiriyenko tried to make the oligarchs pay taxes, they simply had Yeltsin fire him. The people despised these billionaires. They saw them as parasites who produced nothing but misery. On New Year's Eve 1999, an ailing Yeltsin resigned. He handed power to a relatively unknown ex-KGB officer, Vladimir Putin. At the time, Putin was a nobody. His approval rating was 2%, but he had powerful sponsors. Boris Berezovsky, the godfather of the Kremlin, believed he invented Putin. Along with Yeltsin's son-in-law, Valentin Yumashev, Berezovsky helped Putin rise, believing this quiet spy would be another obedient puppet. They were fatally mistaken. Putin was a statist. He wanted a strong Russia, and he had his own team, the Sinoviki, men from the FSB in the military. To them, the oligarchs were traitors, looting the motherland. Once in power, Putin began to centralize authority, removing elected governors and installing his own men. In the summer of 2000, President Putin summoned the most powerful oligarchs to a meeting. Reports say it was held at the Kremlin, but some sources suggest a more chilling location: Stalin's Kuntsevo dacha, the place where mass purges were planned. The symbolism was clear. I am the boss now. Putin offered them a deal, often called the social contract. He essentially said, I will not question how you stole your billions in the 90s. Keep your money, but you must pay your taxes, and most importantly, stay out of politics. It was an ultimatum: submit or be destroyed. The first to fall was Vladimir Gusinsky. His media empire, NTV, had been critical of Putin. Masked special forces raided his offices. He was arrested, forced to sign over his company to the state-owned Gazprom, and fled the country. Then came the kingmaker himself, Boris Berezovsky. When the Kursk submarine sank in 2000, killing 118 sailors, Berezovsky's TV channel blamed the government for incompetence. Putin was furious. Prosecutors opened fraud investigations, and Berezovsky fled to London, where he spent the rest of his life as an exiled critic. But the biggest showdown was with Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He was the richest man in Russia, the owner of Yukos Oil. Unlike the others, he didn't back down. He funded opposition parties and lobbied parliament to block tax hikes on oil. Even more dangerously, he was negotiating to sell a major stake in Yukos to ExxonMobil, an American company. To Putin, this was selling Russian sovereignty to the USA. The breaking point came in 2003. In a televised meeting at the Kremlin, Khodorkovsky accused Putin's inner circle of massive corruption. Putin stared at him with a cold smile and asked, "And how did you acquire your oil reserves? Are your hands clean?" In October 2003, special forces stormed Khodorkovsky's private jet on a runway in Siberia. He was arrested, his company was seized by the state, and he spent 10 years in a prison camp. The message was sent. The era of the independent oligarch was dead. With the old guard crushed or tamed, a new elite emerged. We call them oligarchs, or state oligarchs. These men are Putin's old friends from his judo days, or neighbors from his dacha cooperative. Men like Arkady Rotenberg and Yuri Kovalchuk didn't become billionaires through risky business. They got rich through massive state contracts. Unlike the 90s oligarchs who controlled the state, these men served the state. For a while, this system worked. From 2000 to 2008, Russia's GDP grew by 7% annually, fueled by high oil prices. Poverty dropped from 30% to 12%. The Russian people tolerated the lack of democracy because their lives were improving. They saw Putin as the man who tamed the greedy oligarchs. But in reality, the corruption didn't end. It was just centralized under the Kremlin. Fast forward to 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the West imposed crushing sanctions on the oligarchs, hoping they would pressure Putin to stop the war. But they couldn't. The oligarchs who remained in Russia are no longer powerful players. They are hostages. When the war started, Putin demanded even more loyalty and taxes to fund the invasion. Those who spoke out paid a heavy price. Oleg Tinkov, a banking billionaire, called the war insane on Instagram. The very next day, the Kremlin forced him to sell his bank for pennies on the dollar. He had to flee for his life. Others faced a darker fate. In 2022 alone, more than 20 Russian executives and officials died under suspicious circumstances, falling from windows, sudden heart attacks, or alleged suicides. The oligarchs of the 90s thought they were the masters of the universe. They thought they could buy a president. Instead, they built a dictatorship that eventually consumed them. Today, they are merely wallets for the regime. They hold the money, but Vladimir Putin holds the gun. The story of the oligarchs is a warning. It shows what happens when political and economic power merge completely. The men who sold their country's future for quick profit in the 90s paved the way for the authoritarian state we see today. If you found this deep dive into Russia's power structure informative, please hit the like button and subscribe. What do you think? Will the oligarchs ever turn on Putin, or are they too afraid? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.